Hello, everyone. Welcome to Teaching with Magic, a podcast exploring the intersection of education, fantasy, and literacy. Here at Teaching with Magic, we explore the different ways that teachers in the fiction and in the real world make magic for their students. You'll hear discussions about teachers and teaching methods in fantasy, science fiction, and pop culture. You'll hear interviews with scholars in various fields about important topics in education, and you'll get to be a part of an ongoing conversation about why the imagination matters. Welcome to Teaching with Magic. Hello, listeners. Welcome to another magical episode of Teaching with Magic. I'm your host, Elise Trudel-Cedeno, and today we're back with another character analysis of a fantastic teacher. But before we start today's episode, I have some housekeeping announcements that I'd like to share. Today is Labor Day of 2023, which means for many of us, school is in full swing. I've started a new position as a reading interventionist at a local public school. It's a very exciting prospect, but it's already been crazy busy. So I've decided to take a brief hiatus to get used to the new job, write some new episodes, and contact some more guests to appear. Instead, I'll be sending out bi-weekly newsletters, and I have a guest post series coming out next week on the Teaching with Magic website. So be sure to subscribe to posts and updates on teachingwithmagic.blog on WordPress. The podcast will return in about 4 weeks. I'd also like to remind everyone that Teaching with Magic is on Patreon. Your subscription gives you access to our Discord channel, previews and editing privileges of curriculum products, and access to live streams and live episode recordings. And as always, please remember to leave a review of the show on your favorite podcast streaming site. When you leave a review, it means this show will reach a wider audience. We want these episodes to reach teachers everywhere. So please leave a review, share your favorite episode on social media, and be sure to subscribe on Patreon for updates. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce you to our guest for today's episode. Friends, we're returning to a galaxy far, far away to talk about the original Jedi Master, the one who started it all, the great Obi Wan Kenobi. I've written several blog posts with my own analyses of Obi-Wan's teaching, but there's always plenty more to explore with Star Wars, and especially Obi-Wan. I invited Emily Strand back to Teaching with Magic to join the discussion. Emily first appeared on Teaching with Magic with Katie McDaniel in Episode 4, Teaching in the Potterverse, to talk about the fantastic influences that Harry Potter and Star Wars have in their teaching. Emily Strand is an instructor in comparative religions and cultural competence at Mount Carmel College in Ohio. She is also an editor and writer of several essays and books on Star Wars, Star Trek, and Harry Potter. She co-hosts Potterversity, a Potter Studies podcast with Dr. Katie McDaniel, and she is co-host and creator of Meet Father Rivers, which explores the life and legacy of her mentor, Father Clarence Joseph Rivers. In today's episode, we chatted about the fundamentals of the Jedi Order, the Clone Wars, and the ways that Obi Wan Kenobi's teaching has changed throughout the cycles of Star Wars stories. We do have one note of correction. When we get to the question of the lightsaber training session between Obi-Wan and Anakin in Episode 5 of Obi Wan Kenobi, Emily references the various forms of lightsaber dueling as told in the Jedi Path by Daniel Wallace. She reached out to me recently to say that she incorrectly identified Anakin's favorite move as Form 4, but it is actually Form 5. Once you get to that part of the episode, just know that Anakin's favorite lightsaber stance is Form 5, not Form 4. Thank you all so much, and enjoy the episode.
We have Obi Wan Kenobi. But we kind of have multiple Obi Wan Kenobis, don't we? We have Obi-Wan, Alec Guinness Obi Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
We have TV show Obi Wan Kenobi.
Which one?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have Clone Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi, really.
Oh, yeah.
And we have
very different Obi-Wan. Very different.
Very different. So how do we analyze Obi-Wan? Do we consider him as a whole character throughout all these lenses, or do we look at the individual Obi-Wans? What do you think?
That's an interesting question. I mean, it's always a challenge to perform an analysis of any character that is so thoroughly treated throughout a franchise that has spanned generations, literally generations. And so we have at least 3 different actors, maybe 4, at least portraying or voicing Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
We have so many, his life is so long, and frankly, I think it could have been longer. Like, I was pretty bummed when
but he came back as
where'd he
Force
go?
Ghost. He came back as Force Ghost, so it's okay.
That's true. So we really have unlimited Obi-Wan, right?
We do.
So, that's tough. I think we do have to take him both in each individual iteration, and then also not forget his longer arc and the principles that he really always stands for. Always. I mean, there's a consistency to him that is beautiful. We can maybe make an exception for that with his performance in the Clone Wars, right?
Yeah.
And how he comes across in the television series, the Clone Wars. But at the same time, we look at that and it becomes even more poignant and even more, I would say, tragic in light of the rest of the portrayals, so looking at the callous way he operates in the Clone Wars, you only really notice that only really stands out because other people are more callous than him, but his callousness stands out because of the way he carries himself throughout the rest of his appearances. And so I think it's really fruitful to do these analyses, but I mean, like, I was thinking when I was digging through a bunch of stuff before we talked, and I was like, I should do a whole huge big character analysis of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that would be my life's work.
It would.
Because there's so much.
There is. But hey, it means the potential for more podcast episodes.
Hey, yep, right.
So
you can't have just one.
Can't have just one guy. On this guy. No, it's not possible. So listeners, we'll be back for sure.
Yay.
Yay. So then, what do you think are Obi-Wan's overall strengths as a teacher? Whether it's in the films, whether it's in Clone Wars, although it's hard for me based on what, not only just based on what you just said, it's hard for me to analyze Obi-Wan as a teacher in Clone Wars because he doesn't do too much. He does some teaching and they still have that master and apprentice relationship.
Oh yeah.
But I guess it's more of a focus in the films than it is in Clone Wars. That education between the two of them. What do you think are Obi-Wan's strengths? I went on a tangent there. I apologize.
Yeah, no, we'll get to the Clone Wars because I do want to talk about that.
Oh boy.
So the strengths that Obi-Wan brings to teaching are the same strengths that make him a good Jedi. Not just a good Jedi, but the quintessential Jedi. And they're the same strengths that make him a good human, right? And I want to liken these to, I'm going to refer a lot to this book. I'm holding it up here, but of course your listeners can't see that, but it's this book called The Jedi Path, a manual for students of the Force. It's not canon anymore, but I have noticed that a lot of current Star Wars canon creators are drawing from it to fill out their understanding and their portrayal of the Jedi and the Force and what all that is about.
Yeah.
So including Rian Johnson put up a really cool series of photos showing him zooming in on his library and zooming in on that book, pulling it out and pointing to the Force ability that allows you to project yourself across the galaxy and how he utilized that to inform the Last Jedi. So really, really, really cool book. Probably my all-time favorite Star Wars book. And in that book, it talks about the Jedi standing on 3 pillars, the order standing on 3 pillars. And those are the Force, knowledge, and self-discipline. And I think Obi-Wan is an absolute credit to the Order in that he kind of embodies all three of those. His connection to the Force is deep and abiding. Frankly, you know, and I listened to your episode with Amy Sturgis, who is wonderful. All of the things that you said about her, I was like, I feel that too. I feel that too. I want to be her when I grow up. I want to be Amy Sturgis. So we're definitely in
we're big Amy Sturgis stans. We're not even fans. We're stans.
We're stans. I'll admit that. Hi, Amy. She said she called him an establishment Jedi, and she's absolutely right.
Yeah.
In the way his master Qui-Gon was not an establishment Jedi.
Yeah.
And Obi-Wan is definitely an establishment Jedi. But, you know, the thing about being so committed to the establishment is that, you know, these institutions are really founded on many wonderful things.
Mm-hmm.
And Obi-Wan was just absolutely informed by those. And those in a religious institution, it creates an infrastructure of a personal relationship with the divine, right? And
exactly.
So Obi-Wan has that infrastructure. He knows how to meditate. He knows what discipline is required for him to have that connection to the Force. And he knows that the Force is his greatest ally. And so he relies on the Force, and that gives him a great power. So then there's knowledge. And Obi-Wan is huge on being in the archives, looking up the information. You know, you notice when Qui-Gon has the idea to test Anakin's blood for the midichlorian levels, but he tasks Obi-Wan with the actual doing of that science, you know,
which is funny because I'm literally just reading those chapters in Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray right now, and Obi-Wan's constantly going to the archives for Qui-Gon.
I know, and Qui-Gon, you know, both Qui-Gon and Anakin are like, bah. You know, like we don't want to be here, you know, like
I like the information, but I don't want to do the research. That's what I have a TA for.
Right. Exactly. And so Obi-Wan is like the constant TA, and, you know, and then he can be very professorial. So he's got that pillar too, you know, he much more so than a lot of Jedi that we see. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, the self-discipline aspect, I mean, that is just Obi-Wan's wheelhouse. You know, he has worked so hard to be who he is, and to channel every single one of his talents into the service of the Order, and into the service of the Republic and democracy. And that is what he wants to do. You know, in Islam, that term jihad, you know, people are always, jihad, that's so scary. It means they're going to create war against other non-Muslims. It doesn't actually mean that. There's two senses of jihad. So there's greater jihad and lesser jihad. And the greater sense of the word jihad is one's own personal striving against the aspects of oneself that is contrary to God, contrary to the light, that is inviting darkness, right? So you're constantly striving against those instincts in yourself. And Obi-Wan has that down. He is a machine, an anti-temptation machine, right? He's just somebody, it doesn't even really cross his mind, you know. I think it's very interesting to explore, you know, story-wise, it might be interesting to explore areas where it might cross his mind, you know, but in what we see, he's just such a machine. And I'll make a reference to this later. There's an episode of Star Wars Rebels, which I know you're familiar with, season 3, episode 20, Twin Suns. Mm-hmm. When, spoiler alert, Maul finally meets his demise, and it is at Obi-Wan's hand. And I was so pleased to see that was arranged that way, because it brings the whole thing full circle. And
it does. I don't think it could be any other way.
No, it couldn't. And the fight, the combat between them could not also be any other way, because it takes literally half a second for Maul to reach his end at the end of Obi-Wan's lightsaber. And it's because Obi-Wan is by then just an absolute machine of the Force, of knowledge, and of self-discipline. And Maul is the exact opposite. Yes. Maul is just rampant with his own wills and desires, and has allowed the darkness to consume him, and his desire for revenge and his desire for everything. And Obi-Wan has no desires. His only goal is to protect Luke. And as soon as Maul threatens Luke, it's over. It's just over. And so, you know, that is a really, and the speech he gives Ezra in that episode is just like, whoa, somebody learned the lesson from Qui-Gon about living in the moment.
Yep.
You So it's a really amazing episode. So I would say that those three pillars of the Jedi are important. His sense of duty, loyalty to the Order. I mean, I could, it takes humility to follow the rules. It takes real humility, and Obi-Wan has that, and yet it gives him a self-confidence that is just, it impresses other people and makes other people want to learn from him. His practicality, he's so practical, but this allows him to survive. This allows him, I was looking at our Attack of the Clones visual dictionary. It's the only visual dictionary I own. It's Attack of the Clones, which is appropriate because that's my favorite movie in the Star Wars. Right. Didn't say it was the best. I said it was my favorite.
There's a difference.
And it says that because Obi-Wan is so schooled in the Force and so connected to the Force, that it is virtually impossible to take him by surprise. Because he's so steeped in the Force, he's actually seeing things happen before they happen.
Yeah.
And that tracks with how he acts. It tracks with everything we see him do. He's on it ahead of everyone else, right?
Agreed.
And he brings all these. He's really talented too. I think we kind of, Anakin's so the golden boy that we overlook the fact that Obi-Wan's midichlorian count was probably not anything special, but he's so talented, and he's so also disciplined that his talent really shines through. He's kind of a golden boy. But he has this personal integrity that I think is probably the thing that is the most important quality he brings both to teaching and to life, this personal integrity. He just is always, his sense of justice is unshakable. And his sense of rightness and fairness is unshakable. Now, we could transition to talking about the Clone Wars, because this is the thing that shakes his own personal integrity and changes him in some ways. And we see the regret, and of course it culminates in what happens with Anakin, but we see the regret for this loss of his own personal integrity, temporary, I would like to say, in those beginning episodes of the Obi Wan Kenobi show.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
It is, yeah. So I'm wondering then, to go back to Clone Wars, I'm thinking now, sometimes what I like to do is think about not only like how the teacher operates, but also how the setting impacts the teaching. And, in Hogwarts, you have a physical classroom, but in Star Wars, you don't always have a physical classroom. The whole point of the master and apprentice relationship is to go out and have some experiential learning. Like, you're going out, you're doing things, and you're learning from these experiences. But the Clone Wars is a literal battlefield, and a place where people have to sometimes compromise their integrity in order to get through the separatists shooting at you.
Yeah.
So then, how do you think the setting of the Clone Wars, all these battles, all these conflicts, impacted Obi-Wan's teaching and thereby Anakin's learning experience? Like, what do you think of this as an experiential model, or was it so intense that, like, essentially Obi-Wan's integrity, corners had to be cut? Was this a good setting? I guess we could even talk about how Ahsoka learned from this too, but at the moment, I'm just thinking of Obi-Wan and Anakin's relationship, but we could even talk about Ahsoka too.
Well, it's a great question, because, and I would just like to say, I was just on a Star Trek podcast called Boldly Go, and we talked about the Strange New Worlds episode, Under the Cloak of War. And I'm like, how am I ending up on these podcasts talking about war?
Because you're anti-war
person. I'm very anti-war. Yeah, I always tell people, like, I didn't get into Star Wars until I was like 38 because it had wars on the title, and I don't really like war. So war is never an ideal setting for anything. No. And I think it's not like anybody's celebrating the fact that they have so much opportunity for practical experience. I mean, they could have gotten practical experience in any number of ways, and they did. There's all kinds of diplomacy needs in a huge galaxy. There's all kinds of conflicts everywhere that the Jedi would be called on to aid. to settle disputes, to create peace, right? And so in this situation, but they're put in this impossible situation at the end of Attack of the Clones, where their own people are being slaughtered, and they all of a sudden have access to this extremely well-trained army. And so Yoda all of a sudden becomes General Yoda, and goes in and does good, and you know, saves the Jedi that are imprisoned, you know, in that arena, and of course the Clone Wars ensue. But it's you know, it's all manufactured to bring the Jedi down.
Yeah.
You know, you have this war that's been bankrolled by, you know, who knows, Darth Plagueis. It's hard to say.
Darth Plagueis, Darth Sidious,
Yeah.
bankrolled by banking clan, for all we
Banking
know.
clan, right, which Plagueis was part of, you know. Now this is not canon, I should say, but the Darth Plagueis novel, if people haven't read it, that's a Legends novel that really
Oh, it's on my
needs
list.
to be, yeah, it needs to be canonized, and it needs to be or redone for inclusion as canon, because it's a super interesting look behind the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
And so no, the Clone Wars really wrecked a lot. And I appreciated your and Amy's discussion of like what would have happened had Qui-Gon not died, right? But I don't know if I can be as optimistic about if he hadn't died. First of all, the whole question, Qui-Gon would be shaming us for even asking the whole question.
Fair.
It's like, live in the moment, people. But work with what you have.
But we love you.
But we love you, Qui-Gon. We want you to live.
Yes.
But, you know, the thing is, I think even Qui-Gon would not have, I think he would have raised the alarm big time, but I don't think his membership in the Jedi Order would have survived. I think the Clone Wars probably would have gone forward without Qui-Gon. And maybe he would have taken Obi-Wan with him. That's an interesting thought, you know, thought experiment. But I don't know, though. I don't know. Yeah. And unfortunately, we do end up with the Clone Wars, and it's not ideal. But I think if we're looking for blame for Anakin's downfall, I mean, involving a 19 or 20-year-old who is already having trouble controlling his passions and his desires in this conflict that just allows him to, you know, indulge violent impulses, you know, which he does routinely. I mean, he's, you know, they're keeping tally of how many droids I mean, and again, maybe some, you know, they're droids, but then sometimes they're not droids. And, you know, I mean, it's a lot of killing. It's a lot of killing. And that is going to teach its own lessons, right?
It is.
Obi-Wan is not, despite all his self-discipline, he cannot control the environment.
No.
And that's a very difficult situation for any teacher. That's a real non-answer to your question.
Yeah, but it makes sense because, you know, as you were talking, it also kind of immediately brought to mind the pandemic and how we all had to go into this emergency learning. And so there were just moments where teachers were just doing what they could to get through the damn day.
To get the kids to sit down behind the camera.
Yeah.
Instead of running off.
Pray that, you know, a shirtless parent isn't walking by in the background, you know, like God forbid. And if they, and, you know, as a result, you know, while there were many issues with the pandemic and with the fact that we tried to take in-person learning models and plant them behind the computer, which you can't do, you just can't do it.
Nope.
But it continued to expose problems in the system that already existed. As a reading teacher, I got into the Sold a Story podcast by Emily Hanford. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Emily Hanford's an investigative reporter, and she looked at why we're failing to teach kids how to read. For the last 20 years, like there's this whole history behind the reading wars and reading curriculum. There's the whole language model versus the science of reading. So for the last 20 years, we've been using the whole language model, and it's basically taught kids how to guess at reading. Like if I were to condense the entire podcast in 10 seconds, it's Heinemann Publishing and other publishing companies, and people like Lucy Calkins, for example, is one of the pioneers of the whole language movement, of today's whole language movement, that has taught kids how to guess at reading. And so by the time they get to 4th grade, 5th grade, they can't read. They can guess what they're reading. So like your son, if he were taught through this model, he would look at the picture and guess what was on the page. And that's how teachers taught kids how to read.
Yeah.
That's how we were told that's how you teach reading. So now the science of reading is coming out, and the pandemic really exposed to a lot of parents, holy cow, these teachers aren't teaching my kids how to read. They're teaching them how to guess. They don't know how to sound out the letters. They don't know how to sound out parts of the word. So now science of reading is coming back, and particularly kids with dyslexia and parents with dyslexia. Hello, tangent. Here we go.
I'm interested though.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting. And I'll send you the link.
Please do.
Because it's just such a fascinating look at just how the pandemic really exposed this to parents, because parents were like, I trusted, sending my kids to school and they would learn how to read. And I trusted these teachers to teach my kids to read. And now, they're graduating from college and they have no clue. They have no clue how to read. They have no clue how to, dissect a text. And, and the pandemic really, in addition to this particular aspect, exposed a lot of other systemic issues in the education system. And so the Clone Wars exposed a lot of issues within the Jedi Temple as one microcosm, but in the galaxy as a whole.
Right.
So,
like which passions is it okay to indulge?
Right. Which passions is it okay to indulge for the sake of just the ends justifying the means?
Right. And how far do we go to ensure democracy? Like how far do we take this? And I think in our own, that's why I think that the prequels are really experiencing a little bit of a renaissance, because they're very political movies. So political. And they expose, the precarity of our democracy, or maybe that's not the fragility of our democracy.
Definitely fragility.
And how easily it can be brought down, and how, you see this all the time. Like I'm looking at people and the way that they operate, and I'm going, how do you
how do you sleep at night?
Well, and we're losing facts. We're losing facts as a basis of knowing, because people just won't necessarily believe the facts. They'll just believe what they want to believe. And so, the Clone Wars, I just so regret. Obviously they're pretty interesting as far as a fictional universe goes. But my son was watching the Clone Wars the other day, and I was thinking to myself, there was something going on that I was like, wow, that's just really good writing, and that's really good storytelling. And I was thinking to myself, this is what George Lucas really wanted to do. He wanted to make these big movies, but he, from way back, he was drawing little stormtroopers, and doing his pew 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 thing, and he really wanted to do the clone. I'm just speaking anecdotally. I don't really know what George. I don't know really what you wanted to do, but I'm guessing that there was so much going on in the Clone Wars, and that this is something you really wanted to make. And I'm glad. I'm glad we have them as a reference. And there's so much interesting stuff. I think his name is Master Krell, who is the kind of corrupt Jedi who is sort of secretly working for the Separatists, and he's sending all these clones to a slaughter, and it's very disturbing. But it's a microcosm. Each episode is kind of a microcosm of the problems of war, and the problems of a technology-based, existence, a dominance-based existence. And you cheer, like the way that we cheer on Ukraine in the face of Russia. We don't want to see this country be dominated by a bully, and that's what's happening in the Clone Wars. But what happens when you lose your center, you lose your principles, you lose your values in throwing them at this conflict? And I think that's definitely what happened. And I really, I'm so glad that you asked me to do this, because I always love an opportunity to defend Obi-Wan from those people who say, oh, well, Anakin fell to the dark side because Qui-Gon died and Obi-Wan had to take over, and Obi-Wan wasn't the right master for him.
Right.
I just push back on that so hard, because Obi-Wan had everything Anakin needed to succeed, and had taught him so many valuable lessons. And he had Qui-Gon's teaching. You and Amy were talking about the importance of legacy, and that is so important in Buddhism, in Buddhist teaching, the legacy of who you were taught by and who that person was taught by. This is it's holy, it's divine, it's transcendent. And so Obi-Wan had that. He had that legacy of Qui-Gon to offer. He was the only one who really could to offer Anakin, and yet, the Clone Wars intervened And so sometimes I like to throw Yoda under the bus. Sometimes I'm like, Yoda can be kind of an asshole. I don't know what's going on there, but like baby Yoda can also be a little bit of an asshole, So
Well,
I don't
he's
know
a
if it's like a
baby.
species thing.
Maybe.
Yeah, but he's also, his assholeness sometimes transcends baby. Just like, wait, you're choking her? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. Well, with great power, sometimes we don't always use it responsibly.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So anyway, so I want to throw the Clone Wars under the bus for Anakin's downfall. It just kind of moved everything toward the exits much faster than it would have.
Yeah. And I think, despite, there are times when I say that, like, this is the reason why Anakin fell, or this is the reason why Anakin fell. It really was just a perfect storm of all the things. It wasn't just Qui-Gon dying or just Obi-Wan being a brother rather than a father figure, or whatever you want. And then there, it can be all of these things at the same time. And so it's just the Clone Wars are just so revelatory, not only in exposing the issues with the Republic, but also with Anakin himself. And it's psychologically, when you take a little boy away from his mother, and you take kids away from their parents, or you try to make them grow up too fast to fit the factory model of a school, not a specific school, it just, sometimes kids grow up too fast, and that creates issues. Or, you take kids who can't read, and you say, it's fine, I'm just going to push you through to the next grade because you can play football really well, and you're scoring points for my school, and you're bringing in money.
Right.
And now you've graduated from college, you've blown out your knee. You can't, you're not of any use to the college football anymore,
Right.
Okay, bye. What do you do now?
Right.
Another issue with our illiteracy problem here in America. You can tell I'm a reading teacher, people, can't you?
That's 100% okay. Yeah. No, I mean, that's the thing, is there's so much applicability left and right to these lessons that we learn through Star Wars, that I do find myself bringing it in a lot. And other IPs too, Yesterday, my son, we had to go to an orientation at his school, and the principal's a little long-winded. Let's just put it that way. But he starts talking about her, and he's using her first name to refer to her full name, but not Mrs. X or, Principal X, but he's referring to,
first name, last name.
Right. The way I do when I'm talking to her about her to my husband, and he's overhearing this. And finally, I just looked at him and I said, "Excuse me, it's Professor Snape, Harry." He knew exactly what I meant. He knew exactly what I meant. I mean,
there's sometimes we forget.
Yeah, it's a shorthand. It's
shorthand.
These stories give us a shorthand for the lessons that we need to remember in life as well. So.
Yeah. When in doubt, it's not only what would Jesus do, it's also what would Obi-Wan do? What would Qui-Gon do?
Oh, such an important one.
Indeed. Yep. How do you think Obi-Wan's teaching approach changes from Anakin to Luke?
Such a good question. And of course, we have other people in between, in a sense, such as Leia, right? Such as Ezra, right? And who knows who else, right? Yeah, it is a good question. So first of all, Anakin. Poor Obi-Wan. That's what I always
Poor baby.
think. Poor Obi-Wan. So he didn't get to decide to be a Jedi Master.
No.
He was ready to become a Jedi Knight. He was ready to be on his own for a few years, doing cool things, right? Yep. Would have loved to see some of those cool things that he might have gotten up to.
Oh my gosh, is Obi-Wan Kenobi a teenage parent?
Yeah, pretty much. I think I would call him early 20s, maybe.
Early 20s, yeah.
But he's
not much of a break between school and parent. Wow.
Very young single dad. Very young single dad. And so he and this happens to him in the space that it takes Qui-Gon's heart to stop beating. Yeah. Right. And this is his new reality. So he's got this charge, and it's an unconventional charge. It's going to be a difficult charge. He is going to be a difficult charge.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine knowing what we know about Anakin and his propensity to become self-absorbed and his defensiveness? I would say that he has got a defensiveness when he feels like his weakness is exposed, he gets kind of overconfident to compensate for that.
Exactly.
Can you imagine how long it took for Obi-Wan to get him past the knowledge about his midichlorian count?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it had to be a constant refrain for Obi-Wan to just say to this kid, that's enough about that. You're not better than these other people.
Right.
You need to work hard. That is what you need to do. And that is what Qui-Gon would tell you to do as well. You need to forget about how high your midichlorian count is and put in the work, you know? So this had to be a constant refrain to him. It had to be a constant, I mean, I get depressed a little bit, and you, I'm sure, will know this in your own mothering in a few years, but you just say the same things over and over and over and over.
I already do.
Exactly. They'll just be different things that you start saying over and over and over. And, you know, it can be so frustrating, and it can wear on you. And then you have the fact that this kid has such prodigious talent to manage. That talent has to be managed. So Obi-Wan had to try to teach him how to manage that talent, how to maximize it, you know, without, you know, overdoing it. Right. And so this had to be so difficult. And then just when you get him to the place where, you know, he's probably going to be okay, and he's almost to the threshold of adulthood, and then galactic war, right? And so then, you know, it's like, well, he's not done, but we got to be done, because now we're partners. You know, now we're fellow generals in this war together. And by the way, we're going to throw in a 13-year-old girl to the mix that really both of us are parenting now.
God, really? Like, who thought it was a good idea for Anakin to take on a Padawan? I'm sorry, but what the heck?
You know what? My son and I just watched the initial Clone Wars movie yesterday. He just wanted to watch it, and I was like, you know, actually, this is a really good thing to watch right before Ahsoka.
Yeah.
And I think it was Obi-Wan and Yoda. I think they conspired to assign Ahsoka to Anakin, because Obi-Wan had said he wanted a new Padawan, which kind of surprises me. Frankly, I think he would have needed a break. He said he wanted a new Padawan, but I think that was maybe a little bit of manipulation there. But honestly, teaching, and you know this, teaching teaches the teacher humility.
Oh boy.
Because it's extremely mortifying, left and right. And I think that Obi-Wan and Yoda probably said, and this is just me, this is my headcanon, I think they probably said, this is the way to finish this guy off in a good way. Try not to finish him in a bad way, but they wanted to finish off his training, and that was to transition and have him be the master and see how difficult it is to teach and to try to get, especially with a headstrong Padawan, So in that sense, Anakin was sent to help, Ahsoka was sent to help Anakin finish his training. And I do think Obi-Wan, and just there was a look that Obi-Wan had when Anakin says something, I don't know whose idea was this, you know, Obi-Wan kind of was like, yeah, he was in on this. So I love it. It's a really fascinating situation. And I also love the way Dave Filoni explains about, like, well, we didn't know about Ahsoka. Anakin didn't have a Padawan. He said that's what he said to George when George said, we're going to have Anakin have a Padawan. And Dave says, Anakin didn't have a Padawan. And George just says, Anakin had a Padawan. So it's like, he has spoken. George has spoken. Everyone listen.
George has spoken. You listen, Dave Filoni.
So
you are not God yet.
Not yet.
You're getting there, though. You're getting there in the Star Wars universe. So sorry. Okay.
There was a long...
Anakin Luke.
So Anakin Luke. So with Luke, I mean, you know, of course we see in the Obi-Wan show how he's kind of crossed the threshold 10 years into his exile. He's crossed the threshold, and Qui-Gon's like, oh, you can see me now, huh? Okay, here we go. Because he's learning more to be in the moment, stop living in the past. Like you and Amy were discussing how he usually, Obi-Wan's always a little bit ahead of the game, but on Tatooine, he's living in the past, and he's just going over his mistakes and his perceived failures. And it's just so hard to watch. And he has to cut himself off from his greatest ally, the Force, in order to stay anonymous, in order that those Inquisitors are not finding him right away because of his Force imprint,
Yeah.
And so he's cut himself off from the Force, also because of his own personal pain. He feels abandoned. He's, and so when he has, after he has his adventure with Leia, and then of course, along the way he teaches Reva too, right? He's able to be there for her as she makes this transition to trying to get her old self back, to be her old self again and to be, to walk in the light. And so he realizes that he must be in the present. If he's going to protect this child, he must be in the present. And that's where, that's where his own transcendence is as well, is in the present moment. It's nowhere else. And so all of a sudden Qui-Gon appears to him and is like, yes, okay, let's get to work. Let's do this. So when he gets to Luke, it's all, he seems so just grateful, to be in this kid's life. Right. And that hello there.
Hello there.
Oh my gosh, it just melted me. I was like, oh, he's been saving that one up. He's just Grandpa Ben now. He's old Uncle Ben. And so he can be fully in the moment with Luke because he knows that that's how Luke will, redeem the situation and bring balance to the Force and, save the Jedi and let the Jedi continue. Ben has just been saving this up to pass it to Luke. And so he can just be very open-handed about his teaching. It's all just it's all just a gift. It's all just a gift. And so and he also knows, Obi-Wan has really learned, and we see this a lot in the Obi-Wan series. We see it maybe a little too much. He's learned when to sacrifice himself. I feel like in the series it was a little too plotty, with
a bit
him.
plotty,
Okay, I'm gonna go sacrifice myself again. Even though we were just fighting, so I didn't have to, and then I'm going to go sacrifice. But it runs well with his character because, that's what we know him best as is rising, becoming more powerful than you can ever imagine because he's willing to give himself up as a distraction so the other can get away. Right.
Exactly.
And so that's the ultimate open-handedness, right? That is the ultimate, self-sacrificial, put self aside, for the sake of the other, that's the ultimate expression of that. And so I think that really characterizes his very short apprenticeship with Luke. Although it's longer, because he becomes a Force ghost. And then he also, there's these journals that he kept and these texts that he had that Luke discovers and he's able to use to complete his own Jedi training, so Obi-Wan's influence lingers even apart from being a Force ghost. His influence lingers in these writings he leaves behind.
I didn't put this in my notes, so forgive me, but I'm really curious about your thoughts on episode 6 and their conversation, like the whole certain point of view conversation. He even says, what I told you was true from a certain point of view. At first, growing up, I thought, okay, that's just a way for Lucas to explain this like little plot hole that he created from episode 4 to episode 5. But what do you think about that as a teaching moment? He's like, I lied to you. I only told you a half truth, but we weren't ready for that truth yet.
Well, I think it's a reason that a lot of people point the finger at Obi-Wan. Because it's kind of slimy. Now, what has fixed it? Because it doesn't express the integrity that we have come to know and expect from Obi Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, it's one
especially moment. Especially from Ewan McGregor's portrayal of him in the prequels.
Right,
brilliance. However, this new Obi Wan Kenobi show really puts that statement to Luke in a very different light because, and I know you and Amy talked about this in the Qui-Gon episode, but Obi-Wan gets a mercy in that final duel with Vader in the last episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's really worth watching to anybody who hasn't seen that show. And I think Anakin can be credited for that in some ways, because I think he knew that Obi-Wan he knew Obi-Wan best of anyone.
Yeah.
So he knew that Obi-Wan would be suffering and self-loathing and disconnected and just destroyed by Anakin's own destruction. And so I think he some good instinct in him, thank you, Padme, some good instinct in him was coming through to let Obi-Wan off the hook, to say, I destroyed Anakin. This is not your doing. I'm not your failure. Ooh, that's such a great line. I'm not your failure, Obi-Wan.
Hit me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it had to hit him. It's
yeah.
So when we go back to that line, which seems kind of slimy, then we're looking at it and we're seeing that Obi-Wan is doing Anakin a solid in what he tells his son, because he in many ways the Obi-Wan Kenobi shows that he's telling him the truth, and he's telling him what Anakin would have wanted him to know. And I think there's some valor in that,
Yeah.
And there's definitely love and brotherhood in that, to do right by your friend in what you tell their child that they can't talk to, you know, and to help Luke know something of his father's strengths and his father's, gallantry and heroism, not just say your father made this big mistake and he had an affair with this woman, he got married when he wasn't supposed to, and then he fell to the dark side and I tried to teach him. He could have done all that. He could have said all that, but he didn't say that. He chose to bifurcate Vader from Anakin. And I kind of have to respect that. I feel like he was doing Luke a favor, and he was seriously doing Anakin a favor, who had done him a favor by letting him off the hook. So
that's a really great way to tie it all together. And, to Luke, I think that's really important, because Luke needed to understand that there was an Anakin to go back to. Otherwise, he would have gone the path that Yoda was probably thinking of, in that there isn't anybody left to save. There isn't an Anakin to save. Whereas while they're one body, there are two personalities and two versions. There's Anakin and there's Vader. And while Anakin did ultimately make the choice, does he regret that choice? Only Luke can help him find out. Only Luke can bring him back. And so, I think you're right. I think it seems slimy at first on the offset, but that's the point of view that humanizes Vader, that reminds Luke that, not only is, and it's tough when you watch, say, Rogue One, and, you see scary Vader, I'm gonna kill everybody in order to get the plans Vader, but there was once an Anakin there.
Yeah, I mean, he's almost even scarier in Obi-Wan Kenobi when he comes marching down the middle of that village and just killing people left and right. I was like, oh my gosh, because like my son is kind of just old enough to watch these live action shows, in my opinion, and like his face was behind a pillow. I mean, it's like, I just want to say, out universe, I want to say thanks for keeping Vader scary.
Yeah.
Like, we can't get too cuddly with Vader, right?
We can't.
And, because he really is a terrible, terrible villain.
Yeah.
And I was kind of grateful for that scene in that sense. But yeah, I mean, this war is of Anakin's doing. This internal war that he has, it's of his own doing. And the fact that there is a Vader and there is an Anakin is the problem, right?
Yeah.
That there are two inside there, and the one has fully dominated the other. And, technology has dominated the natural inclination to the transcendent. And his strength of connection to the Force through his natural biological gifts has caused him to get lost in the effulgence of the Force, right? He's drowned in the Force to the point where his world has become dark.
Yeah.
And it's despite Obi-Wan's teaching, not because of it. And Obi-Wan, after the show concludes, Obi-Wan knows that now, and he's ready to get back to work on himself, because he knows that he must continue to be there for Luke. And what he tells Luke is another expression of his commitment to protect the boy.
Yeah. And that's what it's about for him. It is about protecting Luke, and it's about protecting the future, because that's what Luke and Leia represent. They represent the future of the galaxy, both from the Galactic Republic sense and from the Jedi sense. You know,
Right.
They are these embodiments of these things that died as a result of the Clone Wars.
Right. Well, and out universe, I would also say I am a real I'm a real advocate for transparency. So like I would have laid it all out for those children. Like, let's talk about who your father is. Let's talk about who your mother is too. Like she was pretty darn awesome, right? So let's talk about all that. But as the story goes, it's really much better to keep secrets.
Yeah, of course. I'm kind of glad that we saw more of Leia in, at least baby Leia in Obi-Wan, because that is who he's like, who Obi-Wan is kind of seeing Leia as an embodiment of Padme. Yeah. And he gets this moment of, this is who your mother was. I don't know if Luke ever gets that.
No, and shameless self-promotion, but also promotion of one of our authors. So Amy Sturgis and I just released an edited collection of essays on Star Wars by Vernon Press. And we have an essay in it by Eloise Thompson Tremblay, just a brilliant reflection on mothers and motherhood and how it's depicted in Star Wars. And it's just so brilliant the way she highlights how disenfranchised and depowered and victimized mothers become in Star Wars. And how the franchise is in subtle moves working to transform that into not always being the message. Motherhood is a necessarily, depowering and disenfranchising experience, right? And so so basically what I'm saying is I don't know where I was going with that, but it's a great essay.
Motherhood, Leia.
Yeah. Well, right. And yeah, I do wish that these kids had more awareness of Padme and who she was, and exposure to her family too. Like, why didn't
where's the rest of them? We barely see them there's a mention of them, I think, in like when I read one of the E.K. Johnston books for Padme, but there's
Naboo didn't get blown up, right?
No.
Yeah. So come on, go back there.
Like, what?
Look up with these people.
I can, sidebar, but imagine if they had found out that Bail Organa just kind of yeeted with Leia, just like, excuse me, hi, we were here first, but no. Yeah. Secrecy kind of had to happen, I suppose.
Well, right. And I get that. I get that they couldn't, and I think, when we see Padme in Revenge of the Sith in her funeral procession, she still looks pregnant. And I think, they did that on purpose, I think, to make people think that the children died, or the child died. And, so obviously that's better, for Leia. Yeah, we're running a field. But it's a fascinating topic.
It is.
I wish more people would treat the women of the mothers of Star Wars especially. Yeah. And it's just such a ripe for conversation topic.
What do you think about Obi-Wan's teaching of Leia? Like, this was kind of thrust upon him. It wasn't a job that he wanted. It wasn't something that there was no lesson plan for sure that went with Leia. It was just
no instruction
she's in trouble. Yeah, there's no instruction and honestly, even if you did have an instruction manual, it's Leia. She doesn't follow the manual.
Right.
Please.
She is Anakin's daughter.
She's Anakin's daughter to a T in that sense. So then how was his approach with her different, especially in light of everything that Obi-Wan went through in the past?
That's a great question to think about. Well, first of all, I said earlier it's impossible to catch him off guard. Well, he was caught off guard.
Yeah, there's that.
And again, he's been disconnected from the Force, so now you can catch him off guard, right? Because that's a precognition in the Force is a Jedi skill.
It is,
and he's a master of it. But he's caught off guard by this little girl who looks so much like Padme and acts so much like Anakin. And, she won't listen. She's got her own ideas. Fortunately, she's small enough that he can throw her over his shoulder, which is helpful in the beginning.
Yes.
And that is his approach in the beginning, is just to throw her over his shoulder and do what he needs to do, right? But he soon learns, after chasing her through whatever planet that was, he soon learns that he really can't do that with her. And then she runs away from him because she's frightened. And then he has to reconnect to the Force to save her. And it's a beautiful scene. It's a really beautiful scene. But I think from there on, he realizes that he needs to remember his teaching from Qui-Gon so long ago, and what didn't work with Anakin, and what the situation requires, right?
Yeah.
And so he reconnects with that, and things start going a whole lot better. He's got just this absolute will to survive. Obi-Wan is the reason the Jedi Order survives, right? Which is why I'm super excited about Rey movies, because I want to see her connect with Force Ghost or Obi-Wan, played by Ewan McGregor. I'm just so excited. I just want to see that so bad. So that's my official request, Disney. There it is. Okay.
It's not like we can bring Alec McGinnis back. So
why would we, when we have old Ben? We have a young Ben transitioning to old Ben, although Ewan McGregor needs to maybe age a little bit. Like, he should think about going out in the sun, maybe. I don't know. Rides a motorcycle a lot. I don't know. He needs to take his hat off.
I think that's editing, though. I think that's TV editing. Like,
you think so?
I think so. Like, if just shine a few more lights, maybe like buff the makeup a little bit, and you'll be fine.
So so he does shift gears, and gosh, he starts figuring out to trust her. And that scene in the 5th episode where he, Roken doesn't want to trust her to go and make the gates open, the doors open, so that they can escape. But she's the only one who can do it because she's little. And Obi-Wan's like, okay, I know whose kid this is. She probably can fix it. She probably just has the instincts and the midichlorians to fix this thing, right?
Exactly.
So, and she does, and she succeeds. And then, and then she has to turn around and trust him when he says, I gotta go fix this problem. One last time, I gotta go fix this problem. And so she does. So they learn to trust each other, which is really a beautiful thing to watch with those two characters. And then, of course, we see the love and affection that has grown between them, and his willingness to be a little bit transparent with her, and to say to her, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about your parents. And she doesn't want to know too much. She stops that conversation. She's just like, it's okay. It's okay. And I know that, my family includes adopted members. And so it's really interesting to me to see, when, I think for adoptive children, I don't know, I can't speak for adoptive children, but I just imagine that when you have these adoptive parents who are so good and so good to you, and it's not always perfect, but they're still, you can tell their love, and you experience it every day. You don't necessarily need all that information about your adoptive family. You're okay. And I think that's what Leia expresses. She must be one of those adoptive children that's like that, because she's like, that's okay. I got these guys over here. We're all okay.
She does say in the beginning of the show that she feels a disconnect. So it does make me wonder, like I wonder if Obi-Wan, whether through the Force or otherwise, just knew that those particular tidbits were what she needed in order to move forward. Like I love that. I would imagine that there are those who there's still a question of, where did I come from? And who were my parents, and what parts where's this, I didn't come from Bail and Brea. They may have raised me, but there's still a question of something, quote unquote, missing.
Right.
And perhaps
everybody gets real quiet when I ask. Why is that? Right?
Everyone's like, yeah. And while, that telling her that, your father, it is the most evil, one of the most, evil soldiers of the Galactic Empire, that's probably not something a child her age needs to hear, but, he knows what Leia's looking for in that answer. He knows that she wants to know what parts of her parents are who she is, perhaps. But again, I don't have that experience of being adopted. I don't have that experience of, there's an experience there that I'm just not privy to. And so I can only speculate.
Well, and I think that's a really good point. So I want to amend it to say, you're right. She is questioning, and not just because her cousin's being mean to her, but she is questioning, why, where she comes from. Because she asks him some pointed questions about it. But then I think through their interactions and through what happens with her and how serious she realizes that the situation is, and having the adventure with Obi-Wan, she gets that itch scratched, she gets that urge satisfied, and she kind of sees her own parents in a new light. Of course, being abducted from your parents is a great way to see your parents in a new light, right?
Indeed.
So then when she comes back, she's like, I'm okay with these guys over here, so I don't necessarily need to know all about these people, but the things that he says about them, so there are like 3 Star Wars that just make me sob. So the first one was Revenge of the Sith on Mustafar when they're fighting, and Obi-Wan says, "You were my brother, Anakin. I can't even talk about it. I need to move on." The second one is in the end, Jedi Knight in the 4th season of Star Wars Rebels. Won't say what happens, but the end of that episode, me sobbing on the couch, my child, very embarrassed. And then, so now we have a third one to add, and it is in Obi Wan Kenobi when he says to her, "Let me just tell you a few things about your parents. Here are the gifts that they have given you."
Exactly. She needed to know the gifts, and she needed to know that they were her gifts as well.
Right. Exactly. Like that you are not cut off from these people. They live in you.
Yes.
And that is just a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Great scene. Oh, such a good show.
Such a good show. Oh my gosh. And it also, to bring it back to real life teaching, it's a great, the whole relationship between the two of them is a great reminder that not every student is the same. While he's afraid to go back to teaching, as it were, he learns that this isn't going to be a repeat of Anakin because Leia is not Anakin. They are 2 different people. And so I wonder if that was what he was afraid of, to interact with Luke. Like he was afraid to damage Luke in the same way that he finds out that he didn't damage Anakin. That's just how it happened.
He still feels he did, though.
But I'm sure. Oh, sure.
He's not living with it every single day like a best friend he never wanted.
Yeah.
But I think he still has that pain, and
sure.
and there is that caution. He does. He seems to approach Luke in A New Hope with a lot of caution, which is on brand for him. But at the same time, it's a caution of somebody who's really been hurt and who feels that they've hurt others. Yeah. He's so grandfatherly, he's just so benevolent, that it's lovely, but it's also sad.
It is, but it's a lesson that I wonder at every teacher learns, as you go through your teaching career and you have different examples of students of different situations where, by the time you get towards the end of you become a veteran teacher, is that, how do you approach based with all of that wealth of knowledge that you have and all that experience you have, because not every student is the same.
Right.
And they all teach you something different. All the students teach you something different.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. I remember back to the beginning of my teaching career and how I pounced on incidents of academic dishonesty, and the way I approach them now, which is just totally different. I'm like, try to lead with mercy.
Yeah.
Obviously it's a serious thing and it has to be dealt with in a serious way, but like, and part of that is like, there's been a change, I think, in the way students, the way, people view plagiarism, is like just totally not and there's cultural differences too, between the way, Americans might view plagiarism and, somebody else from around the world might view plagiarism, so there's cultural differences too. So it's like, that's the thing, you just have to lead with mercy. And I love that that's how he comes across to Luke. He's just like so open-handed, because he's learned. He's really learned. The teacher has learned.
the teacher has learned, and boy do we. Boy do we.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to look at the flashbacks in episode 5 of Obi-Wan, because that is a classroom moment. Like, that's as close to a quintessential classroom moment that we get in the show with Obi-Wan. You know, outside of battles, chaos, just trying to get to the next moment. Nope, this is a controlled environment where the student and the teacher are learning. It's a lightsaber training session between Obi-Wan and Anakin. It's used in the show to highlight the tension in that moment between Obi-Wan and Vader. Like, oh, I'm gonna, I've learned from this teaching moment, so I'm gonna approach Vader in this way. But what does it show us about Obi-Wan's teaching methods and about the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin?
It's such a great question. And that's just brilliant how they use that scene and intersperse it throughout this later conflict, that the two are having, where they're reading each other's strategies. They know each other so well, and they're reading each other, and they're trying to respond. But Obi-Wan's reconnected with the Force now, so it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for Anakin. So another reference I'll make to this book, the Jedi Path, Manual for Students of the Force by Ryder, Windham, non-canon but extremely valuable. Everyone should read it if you're interested in the Jedi. There are several different lightsaber combat forms, and Obi-Wan he favors form 3. Okay, now some of my speaking about this is coming from non-canon sources, but I really think that they're still pulling on these. So form 3 relies on, it's a defensive strategy. It's really great for deflecting blaster bolts, and I think it developed after that. In the visual dictionary, it says that Obi-Wan, after Qui-Gon's death, Obi-Wan began to focus on form 3. And I think that's a really important tidbit to know, because I think he probably thought if Qui-Gon would have been using this, but of course Qui-Gon may have been, but if Qui-Gon, maybe I could have saved Qui-Gon with this. I don't, who knows?
Who knows?
But it's such an interesting, because it relies on precognition in the Force. So you just can't, that's why you can't catch him off guard, is because he's seeing things before they happen. And so you can imagine how that's working. But when you're watching those two in that show battle, you can see that that's what's happening with Obi-Wan, because Anakin's using the dominance form. It's form 4. And this is just a dominance form. This is when a fighter has a greater stature, a greater, body weight, a greater strength, physical strength. Form 4 is probably going to be a good form to use. And Anakin uses that. Also, he is into dominance. He's got this.
It's very much dominate. Attack. And that's the point that, Obi-Wan tries to reiterate, like his need to prove himself, etc.
Well, right. And you have to kind of wonder about the Jedi and the Jedi philosophy and the whole presence of form 4. And it's kind of like, why is this even a thing? So this battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin is also a battle between these kind of conflicting aspects of the Jedi Order. Dominance. Yeah, of course we can dominate. We can float rocks. Of course, we can throw them at you if we need to, So of course we can dominate because we have this transcendent power. But that transcendent power should probably be used to solve problems before they're problems. Instead of dominating other people, we should be using it to defend life and to create peace or to preserve peace. And so Obi-Wan and Anakin in that scene are really showing off those two forms, and throughout the episode, it's the same. Obi-Wan is constantly strategizing and reading the room ahead of what's actually happening to be where he should be in the moment. And Anakin is trying to dominate until, of course, in the end of that episode, he, tries to finish the job with Reva, that he started when she was a Padawan or a youngling.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting episode in that regard. And I was so taken with reading this book about the lightsaber forms and thinking about Obi-Wan and Anakin that I actually wrote my one and only piece of fan fiction, which I've never put anywhere. It's in a box in my basement, and it's novel length, But there is a scene in it in which Anakin and Obi-Wan, Anakin's about 13, and his master Obi-Wan are asked by Yoda to demonstrate their lightsaber forms, Form 3 versus Form 4, in front of a group of younglings. So I just had so much fun writing the scene and then writing a little teaching moment with Obi-Wan and Anakin with the younglings to kind of demonstrate, to kind of articulate what they've just demonstrated. So I'm super passionate about that. And when they pulled that scene into Obi Wan Kenobi, I was like, yes, double yes, triple yes. This is exactly what ought to be happening here. So
brilliant.
Because he's learning the same lessons. It's the same lesson that I wanted to convey in what I wrote. And Anakin's only 13, you know.
Yeah.
And yet obviously he's much older. You know, this is an Attack of the Clones era scene. You can tell by the Obi-Wan Jesus hair.
Yes.
And, you know, so it's so beautifully consistent with and that's why I'm always like, hey, this book, you know, like they're really the Jedi Path, they're really drawing on a lot of that Legends material to inform what they're doing. And it's super, it's appreciated.
It is. Yes. And that scene, those scenes are just so on point with their characters. And Anakin, perhaps not, like, he does have a need to prove himself, like, oh, I'm the chosen one, or I've got the high midi-chlorian count, so I have to, you know, I have to be strong, I have to do this. And Obi-Wan's constantly going defense, defense, defense. Okay, you need
connect
to think about
to the Force.
Connect to the Force. The Force is that undercurrent that you're lacking.
Right.
Like you're using the Force as a weapon, not as a part of yourself or as a tool. And it's so good.
It is.
It's so good.
It is so good. It is so good. Yeah.
I want to read your fan fiction now.
I might let you. I'll particularly share that scene with you. I'll share the whole thing if you're interested, but I'll particularly share that scene with you because like I said, I had a lot of fun with it. But I think it turned out well in the end because like it says in the Jedi Path, this Form 3, which I'm just fascinated by, like the idea of precognition, you know.
Yeah.
In the let's see, because this technique, the Circle of Shelter, is a precognitive state, prolonged use of it may open a Jedi's mind to long-term visions.
Oh.
And you're right, because you're constantly working your brain one moment ahead, and so you're starting to see 5 years ahead and 10 years ahead. And so in the scene, I have Obi-Wan slip into a vision of battling Anakin to the death, surrounded by molten lava. Right, all of a sudden he just flashes there, and he has to kind of pull himself back out and say, "Okay, all right, I know I don't know what that was, but right now I'm in front of a bunch of younglings, and so we're gonna just keep on going here." And it was just so fun to be able to work in these different elements of what I learned from this, you know, this really random text, but very, very compelling, you know, little book.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's fun. I'll send it to you.
So much fun.
Yeah. A little snippet.
I love it. Oh.
Yeah.
See, and that's why I love doing this, because teaching is just so prevalent everywhere, whether it's in, you know, the real world or it's in Star Wars. You know, it's there. We learn, and we learn things, and teachers teach things, and it's so great.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I had a kid when I was writing it, I had a kid who was at the age of a little youngling that would have been in Yoda's class. You know, so I was thinking, you know, you're always thinking, and you do too. So, you know, you're constantly thinking about, like, what would my baby do, you know, in this situation? If he saw this, like, what would his reaction be, you know?
So, Emily, what source material would you recommend for those who are interested in Obi-Wan or interested in perhaps teaching throughout the Jedi religion, the Jedi Order? What would you recommend?
Well, first and foremost, the book I've referred to many times, The Jedi Path, Manual for Students of the Force, because if you want to know about Obi-Wan, you learn about the Jedi Order and their principles, because he is the quintessential Jedi. He's the one who carries it through to its survival, you know, up until Rey's time, right? There have been, you know, obviously you can't list them all the sources that contain Obi-Wan, because he's so pervasive as a character. But a new book, I know that that you and Amy mentioned in the Qui-Gon episode is Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. Great great book. An even newer one, I think, is called Brotherhood by Mike Chen. It's an adult novel, and it is about Obi-Wan and Anakin, and a situation that Obi-Wan gets into and that Anakin helps him with, and it's all about their relationship, and it's very well done, very well done. I have another one here, and I brought it with me into the studio. Sorry to make a bunch of noise, because I just want to hold it up so you can see the cover. It's called Padawan. And it's by Kiersten White. It's a YA novel, and it's got the most stunningly gorgeous illustration of Ewan McGregor's teenaged Obi-Wan that I've ever seen.
Menace Obi-Wan, yes.
Oh gosh, and it's because it takes place before that, obviously, and so it's he's even younger, and but yet the illustration is just gorgeous. It almost looks like maybe the way you'd see him in Rebels if he was a teenager. You know, I mean, just like a Rebel style animation, but really, really gorgeous book. And I have to say, I'm a little harsh on Star Wars novels because sometimes tie-in fiction doesn't always follow the kind of rules of fiction writing that I want them to follow. Like, let's get out of the head, let's see some action, let's, you know, and
they do that a lot, don't they?
They do, but I think that's the point of them. I think they're a place where you can really be up in a character's head, where you can't be doing that in a film.
There's a lot of action in this TV and shows, and not a lot of, we don't see the inner monologue because it's inner, obviously.
Right. So they indulge in it a lot because I think that is what readers of this type of fiction want. So I've had to kind of reconcile with that over the years.
Sure.
That story is surprisingly good. Padawan. So very highly recommended. Trying to get my kid to read it too, because I would say an advanced middle reader could definitely handle that book. And so then there's, there was a comic series a few years ago called Obi-Wan and Anakin. It was like 5 or 6 issues. It's definitely an omnibus now. So you can probably get that from your local library. Really great story, really wonderful exploration of the relationship of Obi-Wan and Anakin when Anakin is a kind of a middle teen. He's 13, 14, 15 maybe. And also some excellent treatment of the interference of Palpatine in their relationship and in Anakin's upbringing, how really Palpatine is filling the hole that Qui-Gon left as a father figure, and that this is not good. And so that was really interesting to me, because like I said, the fanfic I wrote several years ago is definitely an exploration of that relationship of Obi-Wan and Anakin and trying to figure out what went wrong, you know. Ryder Windham, same author of the Jedi Path, has another book called The Life and Legend of Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's not canon, but it's excellent. I haven't read it for several years, but I pulled it off my shelf and I noticed I had like 7 or 8 flags in it. So it must be really interesting because I started marking it up. Well, I mean, we've already mentioned it, but the Star Wars Rebels episode Twin Sons, which is season 3, episode 20, is just Obi-Wan Kenobi perfection. You know, literally. I mean, you know, this is like Obi-Wan at his finest. And it's my favorite duel in Star Wars. It takes half a second, but it's my favorite duel in Star Wars. And then I would also point people to the role Obi-Wan plays throughout Rebels, which is really, as that recorded, you get this extended version of the message. You know, in Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan just goes back to Yoda and says, okay, I left a message for all other Jedi, warning them away from the temple. And that's all you hear. But in Rebels, you hear the message and you hear the whole message, and it's quite inspiring and it's quite moving as a testament to the ability for the Order to survive even this, right? Because he says, trust in the Force, you know, and save yourselves. But it's a really great message. I would definitely recommend Rebels for that reason too, for all the reasons.
Yeah, just recommend Rebels anyway, you know, just for kicks, but because it's awesome.
So those are some of my favorite Obi-Wan sources. There's hundreds more, I'm sure, but including, you know, all those episodes of the Clone Wars, you know.
Exactly.
And Obi-Wan Kenobi the show, right? I mean, there's just so much, but
there's so much. But these look like really great source materials. I look forward to finishing Master and Apprentice and going to Brotherhood. Yeah, this is quality stuff. Emily, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I mean, I know you don't need an excuse to talk about Obi Wan Kenobi, but thank you anyway. And thank you for putting up with my scheduling shenanigans.
Oh, no, you're fine. Thank you for putting up with my overshare, my Obi-Wan overshare, which is like the mode that I'm constantly in because I just love him so much. And I will admit that I do strongly personally identify with Obi Wan Kenobi in many of his qualities and many of his, both his strengths and his weaknesses, and as a teacher. So he's so close to my heart. So thank you. First of all, for doing this really important podcast. And secondly, for inviting me to be part of it. And Obi-Wan.
Of course. And I shall certainly invite you to come on again because there's just no end to what we could talk about with Obi Wan Kenobi. There shall be more. There shall be more. There's no question. It shall be done.
Yes. Amen to that. Love it. I would come back in a heartbeat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your other favorite podcast feeds. If you enjoyed listening, please leave a rating and a review as well. You can read and find out more about Teaching with Magic by visiting our website, teachingwithmagic.blog. You can leave a message on our podcast page, read past Teaching with Magic posts, and check out our book lists on our affiliate page. We also invite you to support us on Patreon. You'll have access to bonus material, our Discord channel, live Q&As, and you'll get a sneak peek at future products such as lesson plans, worksheets, and other teaching tools. The link is always available in our show notes and the podcast page on our website. Thanks again for joining us, and as always, keep making magic.